Hi guys, welcome to episode 2 of my Big Daft Skies series. Obviously in episode 1 we covered some simple techniques for using blocks of colour, colour gradients and simple washes, and hopefully you could see there just really how effective it is even with sort of using quite simple techniques to put in colour. So episode 2 we're going to advance a little bit. We're going to be talking about hard and soft edges in clouds. We're going to be discussing negative space and how you can use negative space to create clouds. We're going to be looking at sort of sunsets and how different clouds have different colours. That sort of thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. Basically, it's a sort of next step forward in our Big Daft Skies sort of with some ink and watercolour pencil adventure. I really have to work on my titles, it's terrible. So let's have some fun and make some Big Daft Skies, and I might do a sort of, towards the end, I might do a big demo piece or something for this one. I'm feeling the urge. Now if you imagine that your sort of cliche cloud is basically flatter on the bottom and fluffy at the top. When you do clouds wet in wet, you're going to do something that is basically like this. A lot of pigment at the top. Normally the sky is darker at the top, not quite so dark towards the bottom. So I'm going to do a sort of cloud like that and then use this blue that's already in the cloud here. Something like that. So that's like a single cloud we have there. That can be quite effective. Now, if you wanted to put some shadow in there, what I would use is, well, you could use anything, it depends on the shadow colour, but you're looking at sort of greys, maybe pinks, purples. You can get all sorts of different shadow colours. Sometimes you can get a slightly sort of brown colour in a cloud. You really just have to look. But generally, if you imagine that actual cloud is a 3D shape, effectively. So if the sun's going to be coming from the top, you're going to get some shadow underneath. So how's that going to look? Well, it's going to be here. And it's going to be more towards the middle of the cloud, and it might not be 100% accurate because the density of the cloud isn't always as transparent, if you know what I mean. You might get a little bit up here or a little bit up there. Now obviously I've been dotting that in and it looks a little bit like it's quite a regular texture. So what I'll do here is I'll clean that brush off and then I'll get some tissue and I'll just dry that brush so it's not wet, and then I'm going to just take off some of those harder edges here. So I'm brushing from the dry bit, from the clean bit into the darker bit, and then I just keep dabbing off there you go, on there. So effectively what you're doing is you're smoothing off those very, very dark areas a tiny bit to create something like that. Now if you wanted to do something even more dramatic, you can go back in and add a tiny bit more pigment, you know, in those dark areas. Maybe not as pinky as that, maybe a little bit more to mix them up. There we go. Now this can stay quite wet. You don't have to work that quickly because it will stay wet for a while, and again you can blend some of those in. Just to soften those shapes. There is other ways of doing it. So say for example if we wanted to create let's go and put some sky in here. I know my brush technique is a bit a little bit unusual. And then some more up here. So that's that same sort of shape with a slightly flatter bottom and then some fluffy bits on top, as we did on the previous version. Now, if you do it this way, you're going to end up with some hard edges. Now, sometimes I like a mixture of hard and soft edges. So what I might do is I might take some areas and soften them off, pull and push, again, dry off this a little bit, and then sort of pull in from the dark to the light. And actually you can do the same, you can also push out a little bit. But to do that, you have to make sure that it's clean. So again, we're kind of lifting up and off there. So clean the brush, dry it off a little bit, and then, so clean the brush, dry it off a little bit. Okay, now I might just get rid of that slightly hard edge there, but you want to leave a couple of little hard crisp bits like here and here. Now again, if you wanted to put some shadow in there, even if it's completely dry, you can still go in and do it, but what you just have to do is go back and soften it. So again, using your tissue, you can go in and just pull some of that out. Maybe mix that in a bit like that. So you get the idea. So this isn't the definitive way to do clouds as such. This is just an idea of how you can render clouds, you know. So you can either use a wet in wet technique, which I've done on the side, which is probably ruined now. There you go. You can see vaguely what it was. Or you can use this wet and on dry paper. And then once you've put your sky on, you can go back in and soften edges. And that works very well, but one of the problems I find is if you're using the wet and dry technique, you can get a lot more imperfections in the overall flatness of the sky where there isn't clouds. So as you can see here, when I've used that technique, you've got a lot more inconsistencies in the whole sky. Whereas when you use the wet in wet technique, you tend to get a lot more consistencies across the overall sky. It's just a different way of working. I suggest you try both methods, really. We've had a look at when it's the middle of the day and it's quite sunny and you get shadows under clouds, and also how as they get further and further back into the distance, they get smaller and smaller. But I just want to talk a little bit about sort of sunsets and things. Now, a sort of evening colour. So the sun is at the bottom of the sky here. This is an evening sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some more of this natural sienna. I'm going to keep the same colour in the palette. And I'm just going to mix up a little bit of that with some blue here in the palette, but not be too fussed about keeping it as a very sort of pure colour. And I'm going to add in some clouds that are a little bit smaller here. And as we get up, I'll go a bit bigger. So as we get further away and closer to the horizon, you see those, watch out for dropping water on anything, those get smaller as you get further away. But when you get a sunset, what happens is because the sun is closer to the horizon than it is to the sky, you do get a shadow, but that shadow tends to be on top of the clouds. So we're going to do the opposite of what we did before. I'm going to mix up a little bit more purple and a little bit more blue and a little bit more of that natural sienna, and then I'm going to drop that in on top. And then as we get further away again, it becomes a little bit more, first of all, it's going to become much softer, so less saturation. But that's easy to achieve because what you can often do is just go back in and reinforce the foreground one. And as I said before, a bit more blue, a bit more grey as you get further forward. Again, if it's a bit too much, clean your brush, dry it off, and you can pull some of that out. Mix up some more dilute paint and just drop that in. Just pull that up. So yes, it's just an example of, I have another slightly more punchy example here, but the idea is obviously on an evening, you know, you have this light that will be at the closer to the horizon, and that will affect that. So it's kind of like the opposite to like a midday cloud where they're brighter on top and they tend to be darker underneath. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one. I thought there was some really fun exercises there. I like the idea of thinking about skies as living 3D animate things rather than necessarily flat things. I think there's always an opportunity to put a little bit of punk into a sky. So we've got some more episodes coming up, so join me for that. Thanks for stopping by. Longer version on Patreon, shorter one for you YouTubers. And if you've got to the end, special prize, you can wear a hat indoors, and I'll let you do that. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Ta-ra, bye-bye.